if you're gonna put an asterisk on the 2020 championship, you're gonna have to put an asterisk on this year's championship as well. Now, personally, I don't believe in asterisks, and guess what? Neither do the record books. Unless, of course, there's cheating involved or a team forfeits. But other than that, each year brings on new challenges and different circumstances, and whoever wins is the champion. But the haters are always going to find a way to discredit a championship. This player was injured. This team was too stacked. The season was shortened. Mercury was in retrograde. But regardless of how you feel, the championship was won fair and square. But if in your head you don't believe that the 2020 championship counts, then by that same logic, the 2021 championship shouldn't count either. And I'm well aware that logic often disappears when it comes to these types of takes. But for those of you that subscribe to logic, please hear me out. What are the reasons people don't think the 2020 championship counts? The bubble? It was in Disney World? No crowds, no home court advantage, not all teams participated, different environment, no travel, and somehow all that makes winning a championship easier? If anything, this was the most fair, the most even playing field we will probably ever see in the history of professional basketball. Every team was subject to the same circumstance. This was basketball at its purest form. All the external factors were gone. Everything was settled on the court, and the best basketball team won. If any team was quote-unquote disadvantaged, it would be the champions, the Lakers. Because every advantage that they were supposed to have under normal circumstances, those were all taken away due to the bubble. Yet they still came out as champions. If you take all these reasons for discrediting the championship, it all boils down to one thing. It's different from what we're accustomed to. Well, this season is also different from what we're accustomed to. It's a shorter season, a condensed schedule, players missing due to health and safety protocols, differences in stadium capacity. Because guess what? Both this season and last season occurred during a pandemic. Let's look back at last year's Final Four. It was the Lakers, the Heat, the Nuggets, and the Celtics, the top 4 teams of the 2020 season. Usually we expect these teams to be successful the following season. That wasn't the case. 3 out of 4 of these teams got eliminated in the first round. The only team that didn't was the Nuggets, and they got swept in the second round. Why? Because Jamal Murray, their star, got injured. Oh, guess who else had injuries to key players during the playoffs? Surprise, surprise. The other teams that were in the conference finals the previous season. The Lakers lost Anthony Davis to knee injury and later a groin issue. The Celtics lost Jaylen Brown to wrist injury. And the Heat were missing Victor Oladipo, but he didn't really play much in last season's playoffs when he was with the Rockets. So that doesn't really count. But the Heat did get swept. So there was something clearly off with that team. It's not a coincidence that the teams that are going deep in the playoffs this season are teams that either didn't go deep in the bubble or teams that didn't participate at all. The Suns didn't make the playoffs last season. The Nets didn't go to the bubble. The Sixers went out in the first round. Utah out in the first round. The Clippers didn't go that deep in the playoffs, but even so, they lost Kawhi Leonard to knee injury. The only team that went fairly deep and didn't suffer an injury are the Bucks. And at this point, they would be the outlier, the exception, not the rule. So why all the injuries to these teams? I think it's pretty obvious that the shortened offseason and the condensed schedule put these teams at a higher risk for injury, and clearly put them at a disadvantage. The 2020 season ended on October 11, when the Lakers beat the Heat in Game 6. The next season started December 22. That's 72 days, the shortest offseason in league history. Typically, a team gets 18 to 20 weeks off in the offseason. The Nuggets and the Celtics had 10. The Lakers and the Heat had 7. Everyone else got 38 weeks off. So the discrepancy in rest is significant, and it clearly played a role in the outcome. When there isn't a proper offseason, there's no time to properly rehab any remaining ailments from the previous season. But not only that, you can't properly train and prepare for the upcoming season to prevent injuries. But teams didn't really have time to properly train during the season either, because there was a game pretty much every other day. Again, the condensed schedule. When you can't train, you get injuries. It's clear that this season was more taxing than others. You can ask any player and they'll tell you they're exhausted, both physically and mentally. This season had an unusually high number of soft tissue injuries. It's known that these types of injuries are tied to fatigue and stress. This season, there were 2,909 games lost to soft tissue injury, second only to the 2017-2018 season. But that was a full season. This season was only 72 games. And that's with the teams being more cautious and even the league allowing players to rest. And that's not even including the games missed to COVID protocols. And obviously there are some injuries that are just freak accidents, like Solomon Hill landing on LeBron's ankle. No amount of rest or preparation time is going to prevent that from happening. But all the other things like groin strains, hyperextended knees, hamstring issues, those are more likely to happen without proper rest and training. And this season clearly showed that. And I'm not trying to act all high and mighty, saying the NBA should have never done this. Look, the pandemic put us all in a tough place and forced us to make tough decisions. The season needed to happen, and they needed to have as many games as possible to make up for their losses. At the end of the day, the NBA is a business, and businesses need to make money. But now you have to deal with the repercussions. You risk the health of the players, and now a bunch of them are injured. And the teams that suffered most are the teams that were most successful last season. The teams that went the deepest in the playoffs and consequently had the least rest going into this season. When the finals come around, I honestly believe that the NBA will be putting out a lesser product, because the best team didn't necessarily win. The healthiest team did. A lot of the best players in the league were either injured themselves or had injuries on their team that impacted it significantly. And unfortunately, that was the NBA's own doing. They put their best teams at an unfair disadvantage. When we look back at this season, we're going to look at it with some uncertainty. A whole lot of what ifs will come to mind. And again, I don't believe in asterisks, but I do believe in question marks. And when it comes to this season, there are plenty.